Hi everyone, you look great. I'm super happy to be here today with you, and thanks Webinale for inviting me. First, I've got a question for you. So let's see if you're still awake after all these hours. So, how many of you typed at least one text message today? I did. Okay, good. Have you checked the time on your smartphone? Emails, anyone? Okay, yeah, I have no idea how many I've sent or read today already. So you see, letters are like air. We use them without even realizing, without thinking, and that's good. Because imagine that every time when you would be reading or typing, you would think, whoa, that's well chosen. Oh no, that's totally not working. Oh, kerning is a bit off here. And what was the designer thinking here? Crazy, right? Well, welcome to my reality. I'm here with you today because, just like probably many of you here, I'm very passionate about my job. I have always been obsessed with fonts. You know, sometimes when I'm at a restaurant with my friends and menu is set in a beautiful or interesting typeface, my friends have to actually remind me that letters are for reading, not only for looking at them. In other words, that I should stop staring at fonts and finally order some food. And if you think that I'm a designer, you wouldn't be too far from true. I'm a trained type designer, and I work with letter forms a lot in my spare time. But during the day, I'm a busy font engineer. You heard me right, font engineer. And some people have a hard time understanding what font engineering is all about. My grandpa once said, "Oh, so you're not a real engineer." Well, I get that from time to time. And fair enough, I don't design engines, but I still believe that font engineering is pretty awesome. So in case you don't know, I'll tell you a little bit what a font engineer does. So when I'm explaining what my profession is about, I like to illustrate it with an example from the music industry. Musicians record a song, and then a mastering engineer makes sure that it will sound great in your headphones, as well as on your amazing sound system. Jeff Emerick, here on the left, was the Beatles' sound engineer, ensuring the top quality and also bringing his own approach to the experimentation, and that's a hard word, the experimentation the band was trying in the studio. So, like, you know, putting sweaters into the drums or mics into water, and management necessarily wasn't too happy about that. And just like he was supporting the Beatles, I do my best to support type designers and customers. Because after the type designer is done with the design of the typeface, there is still quite a lot of work left to really bring it to life. All that to make sure that the font looks and works perfectly in print and in all digital environments. This is called font mastering, and this is what a font engineer like me does. My name is Marianna Paszkowska, and I work at Monotype here in Berlin, where, amongst other things, we develop fonts. That's my desk, a little cozy corner. I do a little bit of Python and use different tools to handle fonts. And I love fonts because they're complex. They are actually a little piece of software, and a lot is going on inside them. They contain encoding information, for example, Unicode, metadata, as we call it, like the name of the font, and finally, the typeface design information. And typeface design information appears in different forms. We can define how font looks like, for example, with vector outlines, and how tall the font displays, so the vertical metrics, how it renders on screen, And we also can define how font behaves. We can add functionality like replacement features, open type features, and you would be surprised how much can be done without, starting with very basic things like positioning different forms of the letter, depending if it's at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end of the word. But today I want to share with you what I've learned so far about a new font technology. Give me a second to deal with this mic. It's not that easy, no? Cool. Can you hear me well? Good. So, today I want to share with you what I've learned so far about a new font technology, variable fonts. I've worked with fonts in this format pretty much since it was announced back in September 2016. And so we are all on the same page. I'm going to introduce some very basic terms. Font family is a family built of single fonts with stylistically consistent design features and or because a designer decided it is a family. So like art is what an artist calls an art, right? In variable fonts, we could take extreme designs, or if it's too difficult to design, we can add intermediate designs in between. And variable font format allows us to make a link between those designs. So we have a whole family in one file. We gain this way a flexible design range, which means that we can also use any styles in between. This conceptual link that we make within a font family, we call an axis. In other words, an axis is an imaginary reference line with coordinates along which certain change in design happens. Important to add that how design changes and how it's limited is a decision of the designer. It's actually designed. So it's not a forced automatic process. No fake stretching. And I think that knowing which types of axes are available and what's specific about them, it's crucial before starting to work with variable fonts. That's why I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. So we have available a bunch of officially registered axes and also any custom axis that the type designer, type developer can think of. Here you can see axis names and their tags. They're going to be useful later. And this is how you would work with variable fonts in CSS. CSS4 adds new property to work with font variation settings. And this is how you can work with low-level directives of fonts. So that's an example. Not the best one, I'll show you later. But here we adjust the width and the slant. So we have a little bit of slant and we have, in this case, kind of quite light font. We have an additional property, a new one, optical size, for example. And in this case, it makes total sense to have a new property. But haven't we got already properties for weight, width, italic, and slant? So, of course, we do have them. And CSS4 adds new values for these properties to work with font variations. So we have font weights, and it takes any integer from 1 to 999. And these are not limited to multiplies of 100 like in CSS3. We have font stretch. It takes a percentage number in range where 100 would be a normal and 50 would be compressed, super ultra condensed, and 200 ultra expanded. Font style takes an oblique value. It's in degrees, so minus 90 degree to plus 90 degree. And then we have font optical sizing. So it's a new property, and it's taking a value of auto or non-which, and it turns on optical sizing if it's available as an axis in the variable font. And whenever possible, please use the properties there which are already there. That's our example from the beginning, and here we use font weight and font style without the use of the low-level directives. Okay, so let's talk about each one in more details with some examples. So that's Ways, and again you have repeated the settings you can use, the properties you can use. And with weight we can adjust an axis, and it makes it easy to build hierarchy of the text however desired. And we can use, for example, CSS grid layout methodology. And thanks to the numerical values, we can also animate text while keeping it searchable, selectable, and so on, like normal text, right? Very similar, very straightforward, as the name suggests, font slant, right? Easy. So that's an example. That's our Kairos Sans prototype. It's available on GitHub. And that's a screen recording of an experimental site by Jan Harvat. It's all done with just one variable font. This font has 3 axes, weight, width, and slant. And now user can here control the change by moving cursor to different positions and can click to change axis. In other words, to change the category, for example, from weight to width. Here we can see the circle when I click. So, does any of you... Long hair, it's a struggle. Does any of you know the difference between italic and slant? Anyone? Brave. I need brave people here. Okay. I'm going to show off my excellent typographic knowledge. So, italic doesn't necessarily need to be even slanted. It's a stylistic difference, and the letters have different topology, as we say in the font nerd word, or just a different form, right? So it makes sense because so many letters have different forms, it would be impossible to morph, right, from one form to another. We just have it as a switch. And on this website, you can find an example of our variable font demo, Meta. And this font has the italic axis. You can also find a link with a beautiful article on variable fonts in context of web, written and designed by Jason Pimentel. And Jason placed that website with his article on CodePen, where you can get access to the entire sample of HTML, CSS, and even some JavaScript. And Jason shared some insights with me. He said, I wanted to write a good introduction aimed at designers and brand owners in order to introduce them to the benefits of variable fonts in terms that would resonate with their concerns. Design language and brand expression. So I think he totally succeeded in this, and I hope you will enjoy this microsite as much as I do. That's an address if you want to remember for later. Okay, next one, width. Also kind of self-explanatory. We have the settings here, but actually this is something that's, this one excites me a little more. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it. And I'm going to start with Gutenberg, so you're going to stay here for the next 5 hours. Just kidding. Okay, so we all know him, right? We know him, of course, from his invention of movable type for the Western world, which was a profound technological invention and changed everything in Europe, of course. But have you ever thought why Gutenberg got so famous in his times? What was Gutenberg known for? It's because his text was set in such a beautiful way, with text colors so even, that it looks like written by the most skilled scribes of his time. So what was his secret, right? So see, experts say that whenever his text line was getting too long, he would just cut some more condensed letters, like this punch cutter here. That's why his text looks so natural and amazing. And it wasn't really possible in the digital era. We could fake it sort of in InDesign, but not really, right? So now we have the real possibility to do that. And if you need a font that's only a little bit more condensed, or you need one line of text to be adjusted a tiny bit, you can easily do that with variable fonts. I think that ability to make such micro-adjustments bring us a little closer to the Gutenberg's typographic excellence. And here is a screen grab from Axis Praxis website, which, if you're interested in variable fonts, I highly recommend to visit, because you can play around there with variable fonts, and you can then see even the CSS settings there. Optical size. I think that's perhaps one of the most useful and interesting axes in that's the optical size, right? The idea of scale is one of the most important ideas in design, right? Nowadays we change scale very often. This pinch and unpinch gesture that we make in order to zoom in and zoom out, they feel already so natural to us. I don't know what about you, but to me, yeah, I don't think about it. And we use different displays, different resolutions, we design for them. And I think with new technologies, this tendency will increase. So what about scaling a typeface? It sounds easy, right? We simply increase the point size. But there's a catch. It's not easy to make fonts scalable in an appropriate way. And the concept of an optical size refers to something different than simply increasing or decreasing the size of the letter form. It is all about the size of the text. And I'm going to show you what this concept is about. So here, if you see this text shrunken, all the details disappear, and it's just not readable in the size. We would normally use a different one, but it wasn't the case in the past. So before, the concept of optical sizes comes from hot metal type era. Before industrialization, before times when machines took over the production of everything, every style and font size was produced by hand. Punch cutters had to cut each wave of the typeface separately. This was an extremely laborious and expensive process, so that's why an expert engraver would adapt each font size. And optical size adjustments were a side effect of it. So this is an example from a book printed in the times of the hot metal era, where size-specific adjustments are visible. You can see that the typeface looks a bit bolder in smaller sizes. Also, letters are generally wider, the spacing is looser, and the details are simpler. Please have a look at this cue here. On top of that, there are other adjustments that the type designer needs to apply. Now I'm going to show you a more recent example. These three different letters Q are set in 3 different fonts, 3 different styles. All 3 styles belong to one family, Clifford, by Akira Kobayashi. Just like in the previous example, here shapes change to be a better fit for a different size. This is actually one of the relatively rare examples of a typeface family which supports that idea, the idea of optical sizes. It means that each of these fonts was designed especially to fit different specific text sizes for different purposes. 18 for headlines, 9 for reading size for continuous reading, and 6 for example, captions. And the size indication is only a recommendation, but I think it's a pretty good one. To achieve that, designer had to apply many adjustments, just like those engravers back in the hot metal type days. This typeface is 19 years old, was published here in Berlin, and it's a great digital interpretation of this idea. And you can, of course, buy and use these fonts, but I thought it would be great if we could have all the sizes in between, and if we could use these fonts in more convenient, perhaps automatic ways. So, as I told you, since little more than 3 years ago, it is actually possible, because we can work with new font format, variable fonts. So here you see this family Clifford made as a demo variable font. It's a whole family in one font, right? And all intermediate styles are accessible. It smoothly morphs from one to another along an optical size axis. Okay. A little thing to mention here. with this ampersand, if you can have a closer look, it changes the form. So this format is quite flexible, right? We can have some really nice craft-like features inside. And here we were playing around with it, with the font, and we thought, what if we could measure the size of the distance from the device and make the text enlarge or decrease depending on how far the user is from the device. I wasn't very satisfied with the results, as you can see here. The reflow of the text was so annoying, and it's probably better to keep it as a calibration or make it change only in subtle way or on the set width, right? But where you can use a font with optical sizes? In any cases where longer continuous text is present or where the scale changes. And I hope it's going to be supported in all software. For example, I'd love to see a PDF file with a variable font inside, so when I zoom in or zoom out, the optical size would be automatically adjusted. And this project showed me that one of the promises of variable fonts is a high-quality digital typography, which takes less effort for the designer and the developer. Promise of beautiful typefaces, which will do a little bit of job for you. And yes, and we can use this trick, and we can build fonts in variable font format, including icons or car badges, logos, and so on. Anywhere where you can see optical size adjustments. And finally, we have the custom axis. This is really anything that the designer can think of, like bubbles, shadows. I saw a SAD axis, a gravity axis, and so on, right? So that's an example. This typeface was designed by my colleague, Hendrik Weber. This one can become very expressive, can become an infographic itself, or in other case, it can stay invisible and serve good typography. And I want to show you some examples from another type foundry, the Underwear. Kim Henling, Bess Jacobs, and Sami Kortemaki are true alchemists of font design and engineering. They really know how to push boundaries and show the potential of variable fonts. So here, Latin changes to Braille. Very beautiful, I think. Here, any letter can turn into any other. And here we see a library, a whole font library. So everything that this type foundry designed contained in a one font. But it's so easy. It's like you have 100% of chance to destroy the typeface if you touch any of the sliders. So they designed super sliders, so we can control a whole bunch of them and avoid the weirdness. That's an axis that's kind of like animating writing, something that we've seen in 1994 with the Macintosh release. Look it up. And here they're playing, and they were really, I think, the first they're playing with higher order interpolation. So now for most of the variable fonts, we use linear interpolation, which is challenging. It's very limiting sometimes, and the higher order interpolation is working on completely different reason. That's why they were able to make this writing animation. And as you probably noticed already, is that variable fonts can have different numbers of axes or dimensions. We can have, of course, just one, like weight. Two, that would be width and weight, right? So we would see the font getting heavier, and then we could, also access everything more condensed on whatever spot we want. 3 dimensions. And we can go as far as 64,000 of axes. And that's what can be supported. But just as the visual representation of the design space, the complexity grows with each added dimension. And there is another aspect of variable fonts which I wanted to tell you about. This is a visualization of this concept. So we can have a curated variable font where all design space is usable. Or we can have open bucket variable fonts, like we've seen in this all library in one font, where we have some gray zones. So the curated fonts. In curated fonts, we need to make sure as producers that not only the styles on the 8 vertices look good, but also anything in between, all design space. And it's definitely easier with fewer parameters to achieve that. And I often hear, oh, variable fonts, it sounds easy, right? So you just combine 2 or more designs and there you go. First challenge, appropriate design. So even something so simple and something that we are very used to, the different weight of a font, it needs an appropriate design. So you can see that the weight distribution is not growing easily, right? You can see that the stem here, so this vertical line is in the middle, but the belly is like sort of like wider, and it's not in the center. So it's not that we only add on the edges. Actually not so easy to always to design. Limitations, we need same number of points. It can be sometimes very challenging for the type designer. And even if we make everything perfect, still a lot of things can go wrong during the harmonization. That's how wrong they can get. That's a screenshot. I saw it one day at work. Almost heart attack. But yeah, that's crazy. Frankenstein is appearing because the outlines relation is in a wrong way. So the number of points was the same, but it connected the tilde with 1 O. It's like, ooh, crazy. Yeah, things like here, beautiful kings, I collect them. And this is something very common. So we need to make sure that the relationships and everything in between looks good. We do a lot of testing. We have to avoid the ping pong problem. This is L dot. It's a Catalan letter. We see the jumping dot. And we need to be able to detect and fix very tiny kinks as well. This is a leg from an N letter. And here is a kink. And sometimes interpolation errors are a little harder to spot. So who can tell me where the problem in this letter on the left is, if you compare to the right one on the right? Yes. Yes. Perfect. Wonderful. What's your name? Alice, thank you. Wow. Good. It took me a while to spot this first. Yes, so we have to make sure that, it's all like the type designer intended. We don't have any ugly bends like here on the left. But if we do everything correctly, in variable fonts, then user can use all available design space with no worries that fonts will be looking bad in between defined stops. And it allows us the programmatic control. And this is how we would work with variable fonts in Illustrator. They're already supported in Illustrator and Photoshop. I will tell you a little bit more at the end on the support. So you can select the text box in the character menu and choose the variable font from the font family list, just like always. Below there is a font style list, and we can choose the named instance. Sometimes you would like to adjust the weight or width of the letter only slightly, right? So you can do it with the slider. And as I said, axes in variable fonts work as a numerical range, which means that they can be controlled programmatically. Thanks to sensors, actuators, and self-learning algorithms, together with variable font technology, interactivity in text is easier to achieve than ever. So, most common smartphone devices have now 12 or more sensors. I don't really remember so well. But just imagine what we can do. Voice recognition. Imagine that if I would raise my voice, the font would get bolder. Okay. So imagine all these angry emails we would receive. Awesome. Or we can make font grade. We can make font change the grade, so weight with consistent width, and we can make it. We can base this change on ambient light. So here's a video of an example made by Tom Lockhorst. Right, he's covering the camera, and the font is automatically adjusting. And here you can see a screen recording from my phone. I'm at the office, and I'm testing variable fonts in VR. I'm touching that sign, and I'm adjusting weight and width by swiping my fingers on the screen. So what's interesting here is that I can immediately see change and judge it. So when I design, I don't always need to give the end user the ability to adjust the typeface, the font. I can make the sign static or make the change automatic. But even though being able to immediately see the result and make changes directly in the medium I'm working with as a designer helps me to make an appropriate decision and make the design process. So maybe I hate this green and this shadow is a little bit off, and so on and so on. So to ensure readable text in automated context, it's always safer to use the curated, the variable fonts with curated design space. And then we have the open bucket variable fonts. They have some grain zones, and they have limited usability, perhaps. So here you can see the intermediate stops, right? They were designed, and designer wanted it like this, but if we go in between, there is some weird things going on. Not really pretty. Like, look at this, like, it's so sad. Right? And this is how we would, like, interpolate. So when it animates, it sort of doesn't look too bad, but when you stoop in between and would try to set the text, it's just, no. Now the big advantage of variable fonts, I think. Remember the last time you were annoyed by loading time of a website today? So I think it's fair to say that all users are extremely sensitive to web performance, which means that today businesses must make sure that their websites work really fast and on all devices. It's also important to include all the users using slow connection. This makes speed one of the most important elements of web design. Unfortunately, it means that sometimes we need to make some compromises when designing. I'm sure you know too much about it. And it limits creative freedom as well as it limits an ability to express an individual voice of a brand, right? So in variable fonts, we have smaller size and creative freedom. Because if we compare static font family with single files and a variable font, and this is a real data from one of the fonts I've worked on, turns out that a variable font can be up to 70% smaller than the family it represents. This means that we have the creative freedom, we can enjoy all the styles without worrying about the performance too much. Amazing, right? And how do we do it? So we have single outlines from one design, and then we're adding delta points to the other extreme design. And therefore we can define how the letter form will change with the reference to the axis, but we only store one outline for a glyph. So that's where the file savings came from, actually. Okay. Browser support. So I'm very happy to say that all major browsers support variable fonts already. And in case you have any doubt, please check caniuse.com. And with app support, we are a little bit behind still. They still have some work to do there. Affinity Designer, they said it's for now low priority for them. And we don't know anything from Apple or Microsoft Word, for example. They're being really secretive about it. If you work with Java, I have something for you. Last year we announced JavaScript library, which you can use to access variable font properties. It's open sourced and was developed by Bob Taylor, you invited to use. And And then the challenges, right? So we're still waiting for the full implementation and more tools. So when working in CSS, remember to always provide fallback fonts for your user. You need to, yes, we also need to look how to make the production more effective, development and testing, especially for the curated model. It takes a lot of time to develop them if you're interested in custom variable fonts. And these were only a few examples. I hope you enjoyed it. So I think variable fonts for me is very exciting. I hope you share my feelings after what I've told you. And we're thrilled to see that it's already finding a best place amongst the tools we designers and developers can use. And I think that the amount of creative freedom variable font can give us is amazing. And no matter if you're a brand, a designer, a developer, or a user. So with flexible design range, possibilities are endless, and the limit is our imagination. So I'm really curious to see more projects using this font technology. Let me know if you're working on anything. I really believe that technology, culture, and typography only improves when lots of people are working together. And thank you.